So hopefully your issues that you're concerned about today are things that we can get talking about, or we can lead you to the resources in our work that will help you. We're going to get started with the webinar, and I'm going to scroll off to the next one here just to give you a sense of where we're at. This is a webinar from the Responsive Classroom addressing challenges in creating that culturally inclusive classroom for COVID-19. My name is Margie Dorhorst, and I'm just going to stop share so you can see who I am a little bit more. Hi, my name is Margie Dorhorst. I'm a consulting teacher and a curriculum instructional designer for the Responsive Classroom approach. My background in education is I was a speech and language pathologist, a gifted and talented educator, and an elementary principal, all in schools that incorporated responsive classroom. And excited to share this time with you, even though I have such empathy for all of you, knowing that whatever role that you're in right now has to be an additional challenge as you're doing that as well. And I have a co-presenter that we're working together today, and introduce yourself, Joe.
I'm Joe Tilley. I work full-time for the Center for Responsive Schools, which is, the umbrella organization for Responsive Classroom. I'm a curriculum and instructional designer. Before I came to Responsive Classroom, I had a background in special education teaching. I was a classroom teacher for several years, working inclusion, pull-out, and self-contained for kindergarten through 8th grade. I never got into high school, but I did do kindergarten through 8th grade. And then worked at the district level, both as a special education coach, and then for a period of time, I was the director of special education. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to work with Margie on this, and I'll just echo what Margie said. We are aware of the challenges that everyone is experiencing, whether it is in person and socially distanced in the classroom, or it's a virtual classroom, or it's a hybrid. And so today what we're hoping to do is just set the stage for kind of responding to some of those unique challenges in this new reality that we all find ourselves in. And so with that, I will turn it over to Margie to kick us off.
Thanks, Joe. So as we get started today and start thinking about the topics that interest you and bring you to this time, I want you to really think about what your goals are for learning today. But before we do that, I'm going to quickly walk through our Zoom tool that we'll be using. And then as we work into the goals, one of the things that when we do the work in responsive classroom is we model what we expect you to be able to do. So this, even though this is a webinar, it really is more like a mini workshop. The Zoom tools, many of you may already be familiar with them, but I'm going to walk through them rather quickly. You have the mute button on the left bottom side of your screen. All of you are muted when you're in the large group. So if you're needing to ask a question or in a small group setting, click that button so that it looks like it does there where it's green where you're unmuted. Also in the start video, stop video, in this large group setting, we ask that you, if possible, keep your video on, knowing that there's unique situations for all of you. But when you get into the small group setting, the breakout rooms, we're going to ask that you share video. The chat is used as, and that's that little speaker thing that you just used. That's a place where you can chat and add in as a whole group. And we'll use that if you have any questions to add to the group, and we'll use it at the end as an interactive learning structure. And also there's some fun buttons to give some nonverbal feedback. So you see those along the bottom there, and ways to communicate with us, and especially if you have a question. So that raise hand feature can be helpful for us to know that you have a question. Now let's think about those goals. The learning goals for this workshop are listed on the screen here right now. And I want you to take a moment to read those learning goals and think about what you're hoping to get out of this 90-minute webinar. I'm just going to be quiet for a moment while you read those goals, and then jot down somewhere on a piece of paper what you are hoping to take away after this 90-minute webinar. So whether you're joining us as a seasoned educator with experience in responsive classroom, or someone new to this work, or just wondering a little bit more information about this, all of the work that we're going to do today is for you. So regardless what your experience or background is. Many of us have lots of tools that we've used that have worked in many times with our students in the past. And maybe we still have, I'll admit, we still probably have struggled with some of those tools that we've had. And now the unique challenges that have been presented by the safety and social distancing, or the necessity to do a virtual format, or that even more complex hybrid model. We also know that we're in an area and a time where we're having a lot of concerns, and rising to the top are needs for making sure all students feel valued and all students are included, and especially being aware of students that may not feel like they're connected with us as well. So we're going to be bringing in those cultural relevancy pieces as well into the time that we talk today. There's not going to be a magic answer if that's what you're hoping for, but through our discussion and by sharing some of the strategies that have worked in responsive classroom through the lens of COVID and through the lens of talking about how to make sure that we're including all students, especially our students that may feel marginalized, to make sure we have that inclusive and caring classroom. We're going to do that in a way today that helps you think about those practices in a different way. And here's the agenda for today. In the 90 minutes, we'll be taking a look at developmental and cultural implications related to that core belief and how that core belief of responsive classroom impacts behavioral success. We'll do a review of the goals of responding to misbehavior in the responsive classroom approach and connect those to responding to the unique challenges that we're experiencing right now. And we'll also spend a short amount of time talking about self-regulation as a practice that might be helpful for students as well. Along the way, it's very possible that you're going to have questions, and hopefully you do, because that shows just a different level of engagement. So take a minute right now, looking at this agenda, knowing the goals for the day, and jot down any questions that you may have that you're really hoping to have answered today. And know that at the end of our webinar, Joe and I will stay on for an additional 10 minutes to answer any questions that may not be answered. And along the way with the questions that you have, know that in this work, we build in 2 times where you'll have a chance to collaborate with other educators that are participants today. And in that time, you'll get a chance, hopefully, to talk through some of those questions and share some of those shared experiences. All right, so as you've got those questions ready, Joe's going to help walk you through this idea of our responsive classroom belief system and how that core belief impacts what we do with students behaviorally as well.
Thank you, Margie. Margie set up so well kind of what we're going to be talking about today, because when we think in terms of working on these unique challenges in this new world, what we know is some of the practices that we utilize when times were not where they are today still apply. And so I want to just take a moment and refamiliarize ourselves with this core belief that we use to guide everything that we do. And the reason that this is important is because when we think in terms of competencies, those are the big umbrella pictures. And so when we think in terms of something such as self-control, self-control is a big umbrella. And underneath that umbrella are multiple skills that are embedded for both the educator and each individual student that's within that class. The responsive classroom teacher understands that when the times change, those skills are going to change. And so when we utilize this core belief and those competencies and then break down those skills, what we are doing is we are setting the stage to be a great equalizer for all students. And this is important because this takes into consideration the diversity of the classroom, the cultural aspects of the students, and then it combines that with strategies and structures in order to help students succeed. So just take this and keep this in mind, because this holistic approach to education, where we say that there's all these foundational pieces and there's these skills attached to it with these competencies, that's what we're going to use to address these new challenges, these unique challenges that are arising, because they are arising from a place of a new skill set being present. And so we're going to talk in terms of how to approach that. To set the, here we go. Sorry about that. To set the stage for where we're going next, we're going to talk in terms of these developmental and cultural implications, because the responsive classroom teacher takes everything that they know and they put it together in order to meet the needs of every individual student. So first, let's talk about these developmental implications. We're all familiar with the developmental aspects of students, what a 10-year-old needs versus what an 11-year-old needs versus what a 12-year-old needs. Well, what we need to know is we've got to take that information back in. We've got to refamiliarize ourselves with that information. And we've got to understand that this new virtual world, this new socially distanced classroom may impact those developmental pieces. Some of our students may have experienced some level of, for instance, trauma associated with being out of school for 8 months, being out of school for 3 months, or coming back into a classroom where we are seeing we're seeing where the students are no longer allowed to sit with each other. I mean, developmentally, it's going to be scary for a second grade student to come in and sit in a pod that now has plastic sides to it, where they're completely divided from all the other students. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that those developmental considerations are in the front of our mind every single time that we think in terms of, what am I doing virtually? What am I doing socially? What am I doing from a hybrid consideration? And recognizing that a lot of your students may be directly impacted. So keep that yardsticks book handy, make sure you're using it continuously. The other big thing that we have to remember are the cultural implications when we are addressing challenges within the classroom. A student's background often impacts how they behave. And the reason why this is first and this is so important is because, take for instance a student that may not want for everybody to be able to see inside of their home because it's too intimate for them. It's too frightening for them. And so you may have to work with that student kind of one-on-one to figure out a spot in the house where it's appropriate, where they feel comfortable. Or you may have to give some leeway for those types of things. Other students just may not have all the things that they need in order to be successful. As I said before, some students may just be frightened by the fact that they are not allowed to sit with other kids, or that there's this thing going on around them that everybody's talking about that's just scary to them. And so one of the reasons that culture impacts that is because how it's being talked about in the home or the community that student lives in can also impact how that student is coming to school and functioning, and the skills that are associated with that. The biggest friend that you have in addressing challenges is thinking proactively. Now, here's where I want everybody to just give yourself grace, because there's going to be things that you're not going to recognize that are needing to be addressed. There's going to be things that students are not going to recognize that they need addressed. And so a lot of these things are going to be brand new to both you and the student. And the reason that grace is important there is because this can be somewhat of a trial and error type of situation. And so when you realize that something's working, keep building on that. And when you realize that something may be a challenge, consider how you need to address that so that both you and the student can be successful. The last thing that I'll say about this culture piece that I think is important is you can always leverage assistance from parents or members of the community. That way you can understand what is going on, what is needed, how do I support? And so just think in terms of, again, that proactive piece. But when you are reactively working with a student who may be having some difficulty with whatever is going on, also just consider developmentally, where is that student, what might be the stunting aspect, and then what might be some of the cultural implications. The last thing that I want to address before I hand it back off to Margie is just to remind us all that the goal of responsive classroom and the goal of the responsive classroom teacher is to take what this core belief is, those guiding principles, those competencies and those skills, and create a classroom that is equitable for all students, where it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is, what has been taught to you, what has not been taught to you, all of those things. And when we do that, what we do is we honor the diversity of our students. We include all of our students, and we create an equitable opportunity for our students. And that's what the bottom line for all of this is. And so with that said, I will kick it back off to, no, wait, nope, I'm sending you off into breakout rooms. So here's what we're going to do. That was a lot of information. Both Margie and I gave you a lot to think about. And so what we want is for you all to have an opportunity to get some opportunity to talk about this. So we're going to send you off into small groups. And what we want you to do is just to think about when you're responding to these challenging behaviors, really these developmental and cultural implications are really important from a student's behavior perspective. All of us know that when we are working with a student who is having an issue, whether or not it's a small issue or a big issue, that we have to think in terms of where is this child developmentally? What is going on from a cultural perspective? So what we want you to do is to think in terms of this new reality that we find ourselves in. And it changes some of the things that are in our teacher toolbox. So what are some of those proactive steps that you can take based off of some of the information that we've already talked about and build that teacher toolbox? And so we're going to give you approximately 5 minutes to have that conversation. If you need anything, just shoot a private message to Margie or myself, and we'll come and join your group. And then that way we can talk more. Margie, if you would go ahead and send everybody off into breakout rooms.
So as we get you into breakout rooms, just a reminder to make sure that you, like I forgot to do, unmute and share video. If you get into a group and you find that you're in that group and there's no other participants in the group, just wait for a minute and we will shuffle you into other groups. An additional thing that you'll notice is in the time on the top, it'll show you a countdown. So for 5 minutes, you'll have a 4-minute countdown and then 1 additional minute where you'll have a closing time. Stay in the group as long as you can for those 5 minutes. Some of you might be joining in with people that you already know, which that would be a great thing. But we're kind of hoping people connect with other folks as well. So as you get into your breakout room, do a quick introduction. And the other thing that can happen when you're in a breakout room too is it's hard to know who to go first. So I'm just going to give you a quick cue that in this situation, whatever name shows up in your name chat box there, the person whose name is first alphabetically start the conversation and then go in the conversation after that. So as you think about the responses to those questions, one of the things that you might want to think about is how to remember the question that you're responding to. We will also send that to you in a message so that you'll have the message, but it only stays up for a short amount of time. So you'll see it in a small print up above. It's an honor. Well, welcome back everybody from Breakout, and so glad that you're back here. I'm just asking for anyone to share out thoughts that you had about the content that we shared with you and ideas to be proactively successful with students.
I like to share something that I used to do in my classroom. And I think in this situation, it could be vital. Asking parents to respond to 3 open-ended questions or some stems. So 1, what are 3 things I need to know about your child? The other one is, just 2 of them are sentence stems. So 1 is, we really like it when teachers, and leave 3 blanks, for them to respond. And then the other one is, we wish teachers would never. And then you kind of get to learn some of their pet peeves. and just things that really bother them. So I think that it's so wide open, you can really find out a little bit about their culture and just the things that are important to them.
Gwendolyn, okay, I literally have goosebumps as you were sharing that, because so much of the work that we're doing, we always know we're working with parents, but so much of the working we're doing right now, not only are we working with parents, but we're literally depending on parents to do a lot of the things that we would do in the classroom. So those questions that you just shared, and one of the things I would add to what Gwendolyn shared is I found that as an educator, I was really good at asking those questions at the beginning of the year. And what I struggled with is asking those questions as students moved in. So the school where I was in charge of was a Title I school, had a lot of transiency. And I realized I'd forget to include those same questions with parents as they move in. But just listening and really being open to those questions, I think not only are the questions important, but they also set up a partnership that you're going to have with that parent right away. And how you listen and how you value that response is huge. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Anything else that anyone heard in the group that they want to share about something else, or something else that you want to share? Okay, go ahead and just share.
Okay, so in our group, we really talked about leveraging our colleagues. And so students that, teachers that they've had in the past can really give us some insight into the family, the parents, the student. But we also made sure that we talked about how to be cautious of projecting too much onto a student and making assumptions about siblings of other students and the way they might come across. One sibling might have problems, but the sibling that comes next may not have those same issues, or and may be a very different student. And so I think as colleagues, we can help each other, but we have to be really mindful that we're doing that in a really positive way. This is what will help, rather than kind of painting some warning label on a kid that may not come to fruition in my class or in my year or whatever.
Can you share your first name?
Oh, Shelley.
Shelley, thanks for sharing that. And I think what I've heard from teachers, especially when this all started in March, was just craving that need to connect with educators at a time where we're like thrown for a loop and finding ways to connect. But even as people are coming back into school to start this school year, whether it's requirements for social distancing or just their own being overwhelmed, or the fact that they might be teaching remotely, not always having that chance to rely on your colleagues. So such a good reminder to help us to really connect with other people. And then I also heard you say too, Shelley, that but being open-minded and not judgmental, being informative, and just what any professional you'd want them to do if they're caring for your child. It just makes so much sense. Anyone else that they want to share something from the group? So Michael left us a message too, just, giving us messages in the chat is also another great way to connect. So as we look at all of the strategies that we can use proactively to support our students, we anticipate always in the responsive classroom approach that students are going to have problems, whether it's a misbehavior or a struggle. Maybe it's related to some of the issues that have are part of their biology, or also might be part of the situations that they've been in, perhaps toxic stress or trauma. So when we see misbehavior in the responsive classroom approach, we look at that misbehavior as an area where we can do some teaching and support. It's not seen as a problem. We recognize it as an opportunity for us to support the child to be more successful. As teachers have taken these steps into both the social distancing and the remote classrooms, there's been a high level of stress that teachers have experienced, and also a sense of lacking their own self-efficacy and the ability to do their best. So some of the things I've been hearing from friends of mine that are educators too, is that it's really hard to not take behavior personally right now. And sometimes our responses to misbehavior seem to make the behavior worse. So I'm going to give you a few of our points that we share in the responsive classroom approach in light of COVID and light of being culturally responsive, so that when we are responding to those misbehaviors, we can approach them in a way to be supportive for students. All of you are going to get a copy of this webinar. So as you're looking at these slides and you're wanting to take notes or make copies of them, just know that you'll have these slides. In addition to that, we are providing a handout that I'll share with you the contents of it in just a minute. So I don't want you to feel like you have to jot down everything, but just to really be self-reflective and think about what you can take from today moving forward. When we talk about responding to misbehavior, the first goal of it seems so common sense, but it's literally to stop the rule-breaking behavior and to stop it in a way that preserves the dignity of the child, but also that helps the child learn and continue to be successful in the class. One of the analogies that I like to use is the idea of, if you've ever, as a parent, if you've ever been to a youth basketball game. My children are grown now, but when they were young adolescents and adolescents, I attended a lot of junior high and high school basketball games. And when I started teaching responsive classroom, I was thinking, there's some similarities to misbehavior and to how well a basketball game is played and reffed. And what I started realizing is when the game is well reffed, it's a positive game. So I started to make that connection. What is the ref doing in that well-played game that is causing students, it might be the same players in one gym versus another gym, but the same players can definitely show different misbehaviors, I guess, in the game, or dangerous behaviors in a basketball game if there isn't a strong sense of what the expectations are. In a basketball game, when a rule is broken, a whistle is blown, the ball might be turned over, maybe there's a foul, some of those things, but it stopped immediately and it keeps the game rolling. We stop that rule-breaking behavior. Just like in classrooms, when we see that rule-breaking behavior, sometimes people say, well, I just ignore those things. Well, some of those things that we ignore become the greater misbehaviors. So keeping those expectations tight, stop that rule-breaking behavior when it's small so that it doesn't have to grow into those bigger things, as in a ref basketball game. The other thing is to maintain a safe and orderly classroom. Same thing is, I can watch a basketball game and it feels safe and orderly and kids are following the rules in the game. I can go to another place and they're hitting and they're elbowing and playing roughly. And that is because they're getting away with not being called on some of those rules. You'll see that in a classroom. You'll know those classrooms where it feels safe and orderly and respectful because students know the rules and they'll know that it's not okay to break those rules. So what does it look like now that we're maybe in this socially distanced time and then we're in COVID, socially distance or virtual classrooms? It means that if we let some of the little things go, they're going to grow into bigger things. And it might be when we're doing virtual that it doesn't feel unsafe behaviorally because the students might not be in the same classroom as us. But we start to sense that the learning isn't happening, that the behaviors that we let go just a little bit start to grow. And other students see it in the screen and they start to do the same thing. And once it starts to grow, it's really hard to get back in. So we do that, and I'll show what those strategies are in a minute, but we do that in a way that we set the expectations from the beginning. Now, it's already the end of September, so maybe those expectations have been clearly set and maybe they're not as clearly set, but there's always a new day every day. So we take that time to reset every day the expectations for the classroom. Another goal of when we're responding to misbehavior is we know students are going to make mistakes, and when they do, we want to help them recognize it and to fix that mistake. Same thing in a basketball game. If sometimes students don't even realize they're doing a foul, when the coach calls them on it or when the ref calls them on it, they tend to fix it and go back in and play the game appropriately. Sometimes when students are in a virtual classroom, they don't realize that what they're doing is distracting to others or maybe doesn't fit in the rules. I know I'm in adult virtual settings sometimes, and no one's really ever taught us how to be in an adult classroom. There's no rules that have said how we're supposed to do this or what our rules are supposed to be. But we learn to recognize and have those skills so that we can be respectful and be fixing the mistakes that help us to be the best participant that we can be. Now think of students. This is so new to them. Sitting in a classroom that you have to be socially distanced is unheard of to them. And so when they are having difficulties, just a quick way to help them recognize it. And the best fix is getting in and doing the right thing the next time. Also, our goal is to help students develop that internal control of their behavior. I was just recently reading an article about how some teachers, especially in some teachers where there were more high need students, found that they really had to lean more on external control of behavior, kind of lead it in a strict adult-led format in either the social distance or the virtual classroom because they felt that's what students needed. That doesn't engage students in wanting to be in your class. That doesn't help them to develop their own internal control and to be successful. Many of the times, even as outside of COVID, when students were having difficulty with behavior, I would approach that as wondering, okay, what is it that they need to be successful? What control are they lacking? And sometimes part of their biology makes control difficult. But I was wanting them to recognize that and come up with strategies for them to be successful versus depending upon me to give some type of external control. I may have to help them recognize that there's been a mistake at first, but the goal is for them to develop that internal self-control. And then finally, the goal is to help preserve that child's dignity and the dignity of the group. There's not a place in the work that we do to shame children. There's some philosophies that believe that if children feel bad enough that they will correct their behavior. I've never understood that. But that doesn't work, and it may work in the short time, but it doesn't work for a long time. And you start having kids change how they believe about themselves. I kind of call it their internal portfolio of what they believe. If they start feeling like they're the bad kid or they're the naughty kid in the class, they'll start acting that way. And that's not going to ever help them to be successful. And it also helps kind of create this division between the child and the other students in the class. So when we respond to misbehavior, that we do it in a way that's respectful to the child, but also respectful to the group. So the group feels safe and welcomed and cared for. And a lot of times I would find, and I find that now when I see teachers struggling with some of the situations that they're being approached with now, it's just being honest and real with kids, having empathy and saying, boy, yeah, this is hard. And having self-control with our masks on or having self-control on the screen can be really difficult. And I'm seeing that some of you are struggling right now. So what can we do to help make this easier for you? So thinking of those goals, take a minute to just jot down some thoughts that you might want to take forward from a goal that you want to focus on. Maybe one of these 5 goals that I'm sharing with you, or a goal that you hope to address when responding to misbehavior. I'm going to just be quiet for a few seconds for you to jot down that goal. So Joe, I know you're in with me too. Is there anything you want to join in and ideas that are coming to mind for you when you think of goals of responding to misbehavior?
Margie, you did a fantastic job of kind of laying this out and outlining it. And I'll just simply add to it and say that, we find ourselves in a new environment. We find ourselves in a virtual classroom, a hybrid classroom, or a socially distanced classroom. And I think the thing that is important to remember when it comes to misbehavior is Some of the things that we are going to see in those environments may look like misbehavior, but may not be. It may simply be a skill that has not been learned yet. And so I think that what we want to do is just make sure that we're thinking through what we're seeing and how we want to react to it. Because again, all we want to do when it comes to responding to misbehavior, the big thing is we just want that behavior to stop, because we want to make sure that we are preserving that learning environment for everyone. And, you know, one of the things that Margie and I had talked about previously in kind of designing this and talking through what we wanted to talk about was the idea around, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, but like addressing a kid one-on-one in a virtual environment is now going to be so different. And so we're going to have to adjust those teacher toolbox things to really speak to where we now find ourselves. And some of these things may change as we go along, because you know, I know when I was in the classroom, there were times when I had to pause myself and say, is this something that is annoying me, or is this something that's getting in the way of learning? And if it was something that was just kind of distracting me, then and nobody else was distracted by it, I had to make that decision as to how to address that. And so, you know, I think that just thinking through this misbehavior piece and really addressing like those new developmental pieces and the possibility of students being stunted because of what's occurred, or there may be issues of being concerned about turning their cameras on and what is seen and what is not seen, and the, you know, the ability of students to do synchronous or asynchronous work on a virtual perspective. You know, I mean, we're now asking them to be responsible in a way that they've never been responsible before. And in terms of, you know, they used to write it down on a piece of paper and turn it into you, and now we're asking them to type it in, create a document, save a document, and learn how to upload a document. Those are all things that are new in this environment. And so just thinking through those types of pieces. And so just really coming to terms with those skills that are associated with the competencies, and then adding it to that cultural piece, that developmental piece. And I think that will really speak well to addressing some of these new, unique challenges.
Mm-hmm. Joe. So as we talk about all of the goals that we have for responding to misbehavior, what are those tools in the toolbox? What I'm going to share with you on the next screen is tools that we use in the responsive classroom approach. And I'm also going to share with you what they could or may look like in light of social distancing, a virtual model or a hybrid model. So as we look to responding to challenges with behavior, attention, following through with work that we're hoping to do, these are all strategies that we can use. And one of the things that when Joe and I talked about presenting and preparing this information for you, we originally started with the ovals and the circles and said, but that doesn't say the whole story. So I'm going to start with the stars around the outside and then talk about the strategies that we can use, because the stars around the outside are really part of that proactive piece, and work through all of the strategies I'm talking about. So one of them, and I think probably the most important one, is relationships. That when we're responding to challenges that students are having with our learning approach that we're doing right now, is do that in light of relationships. As we get to know our students, and I think what Gwendolyn shared before, get to know our parents and get to know the students that we work with. It's knowing our students and building this work on what we know about students that's going to help strengthen any of these approaches. In the responsive classroom approach, we invest time at the beginning of the school year, and then in part of every day, getting to know students, either through a morning meeting on a daily basis or responsive advisory. And I know some of you in your first chat said some of those things have been really difficult. starting the school year in the model that you are in. And one of the things that we'll add in as a resource for you that we'll have sent to you with this presentation is we do have a number of resources available right now that have been prepared for morning meetings and responsive advisories that can be done socially distanced or also be done virtually. And as we build those relationships and strengthen that, then responding to the challenges is we're always anchoring back on that relationship. Now, ideally, the relationship is strong with the person who the challenge is with, but sometimes that relationship is strong with someone else who might be supporting as well. I used to say that as the principal. Sometimes when teachers would send a child to me to help with a situation, I try to always build a relationship. There was a quote that said, "Connect before you correct." And when I could connect with a child first, correcting that behavior was more positive. In fact, it couldn't be corrected if there wasn't some type of connection. And ideally, I would support the teacher in helping with that connection and helping with that correction. The second thing in all of these approaches, we're working the rules. Rules in the responsive classroom approach are key. They're not something we just write the first couple days and post on the wall. They're present in your classroom. They're posted in hallways. They're put up on a screen during your virtual classroom, and they're taught and referred to. They're what supports the learning, and they're based on the goals that the students have. We also strengthen those relationships and the rules through reinforcing language and envisioning language. And I'll give you an example a little bit more with that. But rather than rather than feeling like to respond to challenges, we need to be in that correcting mode, catch what's not working, really look through that different lens at behavior and at students and notice what's going well, not in a way to really encourage other kids to do well. So not in that manipulative way. Oh, I like the way that Carolyn's looking at me right now. I can tell that she's with me in the screen to get the rest of you to look at me in the screen. But in a way to really recognize when things are going well. I notice all of you are trying your best to stay focused, even though it's late in the day on a Thursday. And the other thing is using envisioning language. Basically, you're using your language to paint a picture of success. And just envisioning that for students sets in the students that you have faith and you believe in them. I can imagine a class that when we start the day tomorrow, that we're all going to be prepared with our work ready on our desks, ready to go, so that we can start a morning meeting on time and not have to shuffle through our work. So painting that picture so they can see that success. And then we do that by, when there is a behavior issue, always being respectful, and whatever response that we have that response be related to the issue that is happening, and also be realistic in whatever model that we're doing. I'm going to walk through the circles in light of responsive classroom in this light of COVID and culturally responsive right now. And again, feel free to jot down some notes. You're going to have a time again to have an engagement time at the end of this to chat with another partner regarding the strategies that you learned. So think back to that challenge that you're hoping to address, that you wrote down at the beginning when you wrote down your goal. And think about any of those questions as you're coming into this. Now I'm going to walk through these tools with you. So one of the strategies in the responsive classroom approach is use a verbal or a visual cue. A verbal cue tends to be a single word. One of the things I've heard teachers use is when they're in the screen, eyes, and then they wait till they have all eyes on them. Or you might say, mask up. And again, before kids go in the hallway or when they're ready, just have a mask up. So simple verbal cues. They're short and they're reminding students. Another way is a simple visual cue. Now, visual cues can be harder to do when you're doing a remote learning approach, but they're still equally important. One visual cue might be to make flashcards. So just a reminder, to mute or to unmute. I've seen teachers that they've created visual cues just in small visual cues. And they'll do that in a way to have a non-verbal and a silent way to help students to be successful. Sometimes teachers have where they have the rules or they have those competencies posted. They might just point to one of the competencies, self-control. So simple ways to give cues. And if students are really struggling, teachers have had some individual conferences with students sometimes to ask what cue would be helpful for you. So it puts them in that problem-solving mode and isn't helpful, and find out what is helpful for them. A student in one classroom said, I just need a word. What's the word? So the teacher wrote the word focus and put it up on the board. And when he was struggling, she just stopped, caught his eye, and pointed to the word focus. Another strategy in the responsive classroom approach is teacher proximity. When we're not in a socially distanced or virtual classroom, that might mean the teacher moves to where the student is, and just by standing near the student or moving near the student, that helps the student to correct behavior and become more successful. What that might look like in a virtual setting is if you're going into a breakout room session, that the teacher joins that group in the breakout session to be there and to connect with the child and to notice and be successful, to help the child be connected where they're supposed to be. When you're doing Zoom, you can move breakouts around and sometimes create a breakout where it's just you and that student. And that might lead you to having an individual conference with the child. And just to do that check-in. One of the ways when we're doing, and I'm kind of scooting over to where it says individual conferences, is start with an observation of what you've noticed and then an open-ended question. So I see that you're putting your head down a lot in the classroom. What can I do to support you to be successful? So tell me what's going on. I'd avoid asking a question in an individual conference that is a closed question. Is everything okay? Because most of the time they're either going to go, or yeah. But have it be an open-ended question. And if you can ask a question that opens up, how can I support you to be successful? And mean it, and say it in a way that you mean it. Even if the child doesn't know, it's telling the student that you're noticing that they're struggling and you're there to support them to be successful. I often think with individual conferences too, sometimes just connecting with a student and letting them know that you're noticing something may change the behavior. So when you talk about helping students notice and fix their mistakes, sometimes just noticing their mistakes is part of what will help them to be successful. And you can get involved in conversations. There's a strategy in responsive classroom where you have a problem-solving conference with the student to help them brainstorm some possibilities to be successful and to look at what's causing their struggle, but also to help them to fix the problem. I'm going to go to the left there. Another strategy to respond to challenges is to use teacher language. Now, when Joe and I were planning this, we said everything that you could do is teacher language. Reminding and redirecting language are powerful teacher language to help students to be successful. And you have teacher language, whether you're in person, socially distanced, hybrid, or virtual. So when you're using teacher language, you're intentionally using language to help students develop that internal control. The first one, reminding language. Reminding language isn't becoming Miss Reminder teacher. Sometimes we're really good at that. But the goal is for students to develop the ability to remind themselves. So by doing that, the goal is to ask questions or to set them up to be successful. You're going to get emailed to you some prompts for reminding language. So here's one example. Who can remind us what our rule blank looks like when we blank? So an example might be, who can remind us what our rule respect others looks like when we listen to others in our online classroom? And then listen and ask. To build success and to keep building those relationships, follow up reminding language when you see that success with reinforcing language. I see students putting their books and putting down their books and turning their eyes toward the screen. And the other thing is you can use envisioning language to keep this positive behavior going. I know when we listen to each other, we show respect by eliminating distractions and giving our full attention. So helping paint that picture for success. Another kind of teacher language to help students fix their challenges or respond to those challenges is redirecting language. In responsive classroom, we'd say use lots of reinforcing language, use some reminding language, and use less redirecting language. But redirecting language is that way to quick stop misbehavior and get kids back on track. So an example might be, I see blank, try that again. I see faces without masks, try that again. And when you say that, stop and really notice what students are doing and that they're fixing it. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that shows that you're expecting students to follow that rule. And as you see them doing that, follow up again with reinforcing language. I notice you fixing your masks. You're showing responsibility and really showing empathy for others. And again, if that's been a problem, use envisioning language. Next time that something's coming up and you want to make sure that everybody has their masks on, which probably is all the time, but especially I know in classrooms. I know when we wear masks, we're being respectful to ourselves and to others. So again, connecting to those rules. Reminding and redirecting language in light of COVID, like I said, you'll have these examples. But in addition to that, if you're interested in learning more about reminding and redirecting language, we have a lot of resources, and especially the book, The Power of Our Words, and The Power of Our Words for Middle School. Last two strategies, reteach and practice. Whatever skills students are struggling with may mean that they need more practice and they need to be retaught those skills. Just because you've taught them once doesn't mean they know them. And there's times that you might have to reteach and practice more. And what I encourage you here is if just a couple of students need reteach and practice, offer to reteach and practice with them and then do that and then support them for being successful. But don't do it in a threatening way. Looks like a few of you need to stay in and practice wearing masks at recess time. Yeah. I'm going to stay here and just help anybody that might need a little bit more time practicing getting their mask on straight. I'll keep a couple of you here just for a couple seconds before we go out for recess, just to make sure you've got it. All right, looks like we're ready to go. So doing it in that way that's just empathetic and caring. And then the last circle there, looking at logical consequences in light of responsive classroom. Logical consequences are ways that we teach students after there's been a mistake to help them learn from the mistake and to not, and to have success after that. So sometimes it's a loss of privilege. Looks like we're having some struggles with technology right now. Take a break from that technology, put your iPad down. When I can see that you're calm and you're able to be respectful, I'll tell you to pick it up again. So short, loss of privilege, might need some reteach and repractice, but get them back and start with it again. It might need a fix it. Maybe someone said something that was a hurtful word to something. And I think we have to be really aware of some of those things right now, even more than ever. If there's been something that's been said that's been hurtful, stop. What do you need to do to show our rule of respect others? And the last one is take a timeout, or we call it the middle school level, take space and time. I know when we've been in a virtual setting, that's been a little bit more of a challenge, but for some students, it's just to take a break, calm down, and rejoin the group. I would say if you see in a virtual classroom that a student needs that, that might be a time where you just take a stop, and perhaps it might be a time to do an individual conference with that child. Or it might be a time for them to be in a breakout by themselves to have some calm time. In a classroom, taking that time to learn to calm and to rejoin a group needs teaching and practice and support. So it's not a threat, but it becomes a time for success. What we're realizing with students when they get into a timeout or take that space and time, that many students find a way to calm themselves down, but especially some students use that time, and it might just be a time where they're rethinking what's going on, and kind of their mind just stays in the problem, and that can even cause it to be a bigger problem. So what we sometimes need to do is teach kids how to calm down when they're in a take a break or a calming time. Another practice in the responsive classroom approach is a quiet time. We build that in after a lunch break so that students can practice having that self-control. I'm going to show you another slide where we talk about how to teach those self-regulation skills. In the responsive classroom approach, we teach a practice called an energizer or a brain break. They often involve movement, and many times they're a time that's kind of fun and maybe engaged with others. It's been a little bit of a challenge for some of us that are doing this virtually, but also social distance. But there's a lot of great ideas that people have come up with to do energizers and brain breaks. But as we do that, we can also use them to teach how to self-regulate, how to calm, how to change that emotional state that you're in. And when we look that that's a need for either individual students, small groups, or a whole group, when we teach it as a whole group, it's a lot easier for individual students to use it for calming, whether they're in a take a break or finding a time where they're maybe just calming themselves down. In the responsive classroom approach, when we use the practice of quiet time, it's a time where we can intentionally help students also practice having quietness and calmness and self-regulate. One of the big things when we do this too is that we're in a calm place, and that if we catch ourselves needing those self-regulation skills, that we model how to do that. I'm going to teach you one right now, and I'm going to share an example about how this could be used. So in this one, I'm going to stop share for a minute. This is a strategy that I learned from a counselor that I worked with, and he worked with students in our school to help them to be successful individual. He was from an outside agency. And one of the students who was really struggling asked, well, what are you doing to help this student to be successful? So he's teaching me some strategies. And one strategy he said, well, I teach him 5-finger breathing. So I said, okay, teach me. I could use some self-regulation too. So let's all practice a little 5-finger breathing. And this is what it looks like. With one hand, just raise your hand. And with your other hand, what you're going to do is go up your finger, breathe in, and down your finger, breathe out. So practice in and out. So let's just try it. In, out. In, out. In, out. In, out. In, out. And just take that calmness and hang on to it. He taught me that strategy, and it was just an interesting example that I had a student, I was an elementary principal at that time, had a little student that was in in a real state of crisis one morning and came into my office, and he was in the state where once he got into my office, he started basically ripping up the office, tipping over chairs, finding books that he could throw. He was just a kindergartner, but he could be pretty aggressive. So our typical response to this little guy was to have everybody come into my office and maybe have 3 or 4 people trying to take as many chairs out of the office or things that were breakable, and eventually, trying to help him to calm down, but essentially probably have to do some type of restraint if he got to a point that he was dangerous. After I learned this strategy, I said to the other people that wanted to come in, I said, just stay out. And I stood by the door. I could sense that my heart was beating, but I just stayed by the door, and decided I was going to practice some of those calming strategies and use reinforcing language. So I stood by the door and just started breathing in and out as he's tipping over chairs. And I'm not telling him what I'm doing. And all of a sudden I noticed he started doing something with his fingers. And he'd look at me, and I just kept doing it. And then I'd say some comment, I see that your feet are still. That's all I'd say. I see that you're looking toward the chair. And after a little bit, he picked up the chairs, picked up the books, sat down. And then I said, would you like to know what I was doing with my fingers? So not only did I teach him a calming strategy, I taught him a strategy he could use anywhere. So he could use that strategy to help him calm down in his kindergarten classroom, on the school bus, and at home where things were kind of rough for him. All right, I feel like I've given you so much information. So I'm going to give you a time again that you're going to get a chance to talk with the partner. In this time, you're going to get a chance again to go back to a breakout room. I'm going to put you back in the same breakout rooms because you've already connected with folks. In this breakout room, I want you to think about the strategies that we just talked about, preventing misbehavior, but then also strategies you would use to address these unique challenges. And also, what might you do because of your unique setting that you're in? Some takeaways, but maybe some things that you're already doing. As you get into your breakout rooms, you're going to have the same amount of time and you'll be with the same group. So consider again what this might work in your classroom, but then also individual things that might be successful. Well, welcome back. And as we wrap up this 90 minutes, and I really appreciate again your engagement, your ability to share with each other, the thoughts that you came up with and the examples that you have are all powerful when you're connecting with others. As you leave this webinar, you'll get this webinar sent to you, and you'll also get those additional resources for language. 2 other resources in the responsive classroom approach for responding to misbehavior. Teaching Self-Discipline is for elementary level, and See the Good in Students are both books that are really helpful, easy to read books. Teaching the Good in Students is for middle school. Yardsticks, as you're looking at those developmental readiness areas, there's also a great area on being culturally relevant as well, and I find that one's really helpful. And our organization has best put out a number of quick coaching guides. They tend to be a 4-sided document that can be helpful in just that short amount of professional development, looking at specific areas of need for improvement, taking a reflection piece, a few strategies to try, and then to create an action plan. So a number of those are listed there as well. What I like about the quick coaching guides too is they are written by educators who are in the field like all of you. So they're definitely helpful. In fact, Lisa, who was just on here, was the author of a couple of them. So Lisa, thank you for all the work that you've put into them as well. These are also our social media sites. So as you have input to give in and resources to share, I find that these are some of my places I go to first to get some ideas, but also to share with others as well. So as we wrap this up today, I want you to just take that idea to wrap up the learning that you've been doing and take a moment to think about your takeaway from today's webinar. Considering the discussion that we've had, what's a word or a short phrase that's a key takeaway for you from today? And as you look at that chat box as it grows, thinking about those words, remember those words, because they're not just for you, but they're for everyone else. Giving grace to our students and ourselves. That connection and empathy. Yeah, and connection helps correction and before correction. The power of those open-ended questions. And some great ideas to support in working with our colleagues and our parents. And great reminder, Shelley, of those developmental implications as well. As we wrap up our work today, go back to that goal that you wrote at the beginning of our webinar. Take a look to see if that goal was addressed for you. And then know again that this is a resource that'll be available for you and those additional resources. A couple of last things. Feel free to reach out to me or to Joe. We're here to support you. Our organization is here to support you. If you go to our website, not only have we included a number of resources in our bookstore and things that are available to you, we have workshops and webinars that are available, but also there's a number of free resources, especially in light of COVID and things that are going on right now. I'll have our organization, our marketing folks send out, again, those free resources for morning meetings and responsive advisory planning. And know again that you'll have that language resource as well. Joe, would you like to jot in any last words as we wrap things up?
Sure. I just want to say first, thank you all for being here, and secondly, the key thing that I think that Margie and I both want to leave you with is the idea that we recognize that the world around us has changed, and when I say the world, I'm talking about the classroom, but also the impact that's going on in the classroom with the community that's around it. And so with that said, the strategies, there's not new strategies. It's just adjusting the strategies that we know work. These foundational pieces we know work, relationships work, and conversations work, and those types of things. And so as you're going through this, we recognize that the challenge that's on every educator is to figure out how to adjust their skill set to help adjust the student's skill set. And I think the key thing to remember is that we're all in a place where we are adjusting what we are doing. And students are having to do that too. So they're learning your way, you're learning your way. And I love the fact that so many people spoke of this idea of just giving grace to yourselves, giving grace to your students, your colleagues, all of those things. And as you go through this, the way, and this is the thing that I always love about responsive classroom teachers. What we do is we build a foundation to make sure that all students can participate regardless. And so when they come to us, we set the stage and we model for them, and we proactively work with them so that they can be in that place and be included regardless of the developmental aspects, regardless of the cultural aspects. And so as you're adjusting and you're addressing some of these unique challenges, just remember your toolbox is still there. You may have to adjust it a little bit, but your toolbox is still there. And, you know, Margie's a part of your toolbox. I'm a part of your toolbox. Those social media places are part of the toolbox. Feel free to always reach out because we're here to help. And
that really brings our content to an end. but we're going to stay on for another 10 minutes for anyone that has any remaining things to share or any questions to share. But I really want to thank all of you for the time that you've given here, the dedication that you have to the work that you're doing. And again, just like Joe said, we're here for you. So know that, feel free to reach out any way that you can.
I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for supporting staff during this time. We have been at RC school for many years and have some wonderful teachers, but I can tell the stress of this year is having an impact on the way they teach.
We've been talking about how difficult that's been. And, you know, I know we're going to be presenting a one-day workshop to support for that positive culture for staff and some of those tried and true practices we've done there. I feel like right now that some of the things that I'm seeing that teachers are struggling with is the stress of the job right now. So taking that time, I think, you know, the word grace that I kept saying over and over again made that too. But I think an awareness of it is really important. What have you tried, Lori?
I've been sending out things on a weekly basis, either by email or this week I found a really nice self-care bingo with really soft colors and stuff and said, you know, we're in COVID, we're not going to play bingo, but these are great reminders and you are important. Please take care of you. And just trying to make that connection piece with them as well. But it's harder because of our schedules are different this year. So we're trying. Our admin have been great. They have bought food and cookies and, you know, treats, which is always nice. But the day-to-day is still much harder for our teachers right now than it normally is.
Are you all like a hybrid model? Are you virtual? What is the?
We started totally virtually, and as of this week, all of our K-4 students are back full-time on campus.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so we're glad they're back, but you know, everything from the littlest thing to how do you send kids to the bathroom or recess or snack or lunch, there's just a lot of things to adapt this year.
I think that, you know, you said something earlier and it really resonates with me in this because I think it's the self-care piece. And I think, you know, the hard part is when you've got a group of educators, they're all going to have different ways that they do that. But I think that one of the things that is so different for so many people is this is a level of exhaustion that educators, you know, I mean, it just wears you down because you are so heightened to every piece of, no, don't hug that person. No, don't get too close to him. And I think that, you know, maybe even just speaking to that so that they recognize that those things are normal could be something that might be just reassuring to them so that maybe they can take a breath a little bit. And I, you know, it is that exhaustion level is really high.
It is, and it's both physical and emotional. And I and several others have in multiple ways said, anytime you need a break for any reason, no questions asked, text us, we'll come. You can go outside, take a walk, whatever you need to do. I've only had one take advantage of that so far. But we're saying, we know, you know, and just wearing the mask all day. I mean, that alone is hard. I have an office. I can take mine off once in a while, you know.
Lori, can I offer a couple of thoughts here?
Sure.
Sorry, I had a consulting practice and I am a yoga teacher, and a lot of my work in recent years has been on wellness and self-care, and I am back teaching full-time. I have never in my 27 years of teaching been so drained, and it's been 3 weeks. I have such a new appreciation for this. And we were on a call last night. I live in Maryland with some local school officials and a really good leader for some underserved communities here talking about just this. And I think about this all the time. I think all the time that what we're asking our 4-year-olds to do in our county is ridiculous. And I'm just going to leave it at that because they're not meant to do this. I'm very concerned about teachers. It is my hope that we can find a way to take care of teachers. And one of the things I'm hearing from people is that we just need the opportunity to look at another human, ideally in real life, and say this is hard, and to name the feelings. Because when we sit on this screen and it seems like everything's okay, the back of our brain is telling us somehow it's okay. And so these negative, hard feelings you're having are abnormal, and that just fuels our stress cycle. I'm a mindfulness and yoga teacher. I think anytime people can just stop and take 3 breaths, that does begin to change your nervous system. But in a lot of people, that creates stress. And I think giving your number to staff and saying, come or we'll leave you, is hugely important too. And I'm seeing teachers who give everything, who are sacrificing what they need to do for themselves or their families. And this is not sustainable. There was an article in Medium Element a couple weeks ago about how our surge capacity is exhausted. And it's exactly what Joe is speaking about. We can't continue like this. And it's hard to see where the relief is going to come. But it starts with each of us saying, I need to pause. I need help with this. I cried in a meeting today with our counselor because we have this program that's like essentially the Game of Thrones version of Class Dojo we have to use. And I started crying and saying, I wouldn't have taken this job if I knew I had to use this. Like, that's not really it. I was like, but this pains me, right? And in a matter of minutes, we acknowledged what we felt and we moved on, and I understand why. But I feel like we're all in these little silos behind our masks, behind a screen. And we got to be able to talk to people about how we feel if we're going to move through it and feel better.
Yeah.
I'd like to add something just really briefly. I think the idea of having someone buddying up with someone and having them hold you accountable for the self-care piece. Shelly and I work in Virginia Beach, and if you kind of want to know how some teachers are feeling, watch our last school board meeting, because they had a lot of anonymous letters read. And I'm not trying to air our dirty laundry, but what I am thinking is that some of those things that were said just is how teachers are feeling. And one of the things with self-care, what's that? Like, they don't have time for that. But I really think that, just talking about the importance of that is huge, and buddying up. And the whole idea of being in silos, we've got to figure out how to work together, and just, how can we lighten the workload? How can we work strategically to lighten the workload? So those are just questions that are on my mind. But I do think partnering with someone and saying, let's commit to this. Let's hold each other accountable for walking or, breathing or something.
Gwendolyn, I'm right up the road in Annapolis, and we are having the same conversation here. It is so nasty on social media. Like, I have ducked off. I was in town last weekend and I heard 2 separate groups of parents talking about the transition to school, and both of those conversations ended with blaming the teachers. I didn't know the women, I didn't say anything. And I think your idea of accountability buddies or compassion buddies, to just say, what are you going to do for yourself, and let's hold each other accountable. And in my mind, self-care is something that you do intentionally and just for yourself. And it might mean 2 minutes that you go, listen to a podcast you like, or go for a walk. It doesn't have to be a big investment, but you have to know that you're giving yourself the same intentional attention and care that you're giving your students. And I think if you can get your teachers to have buddies, that is half of it. Somebody to talk to say, hey, remember, you were going to go for a walk tonight. Hey, remember, you're going to take a bath. You were going to read that novel, whatever it is.
Yeah, I like that. I really do.
I think
If you
too.
ever have come across great articles that I might share with the staff, they're hearing this from me, they're hearing it from our head, but sometimes another voice is not a bad thing. So if you ever come across something that might be helpful to share, I'd sure be open to looking at that too.
I'm going to put something in the chat. I think it's the title, but it's close if you search it.
Right.
Lisa, thank you so much too, and all of you, Gwendolyn and Lori too, for sharing. I hate to start to wrap up this conversation, but I think, Lori, you really opened up a conversation that we're just not having enough. And Gwendolyn, it sounds like people are afraid to have that conversation, that they have to post anonymous letters because they're afraid to do that. I think as leaders, one of the things, if you can walk away with, is I've heard what teachers have really appreciated is when when leaders recognize it. And even as colleagues to each other, if you recognize the challenge that somebody's struggling. And again, you can lean back on that teacher language. I see your this. And rather than asking those closed questions of, you know, are you okay? Because again, they're probably not going to be responding to you. I don't know why my eye runs, but respond to you in with the words that you want to hear. But even, especially as a leader, what can I do to support you? Or how can I support you? And Lori, that idea of having anybody will come anytime that you need. But if there's a team of people that aren't in classes that even can walk through hallways and check to see anybody needing a break right now, or, you know, any little way, because I think the thing that I'm hearing from teachers that's the most stressful, I don't know what the most stressful is, but one of the most stressful things is when their feelings are minimized. Like people think that they can do this. They believe that it can do it, and it feels kind of flippant. So how we can recognize that they're really struggling.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
To wrap up, but something as a teacher, I teach kindergarten and I'm the responsive classroom person or mentor teacher. But something that our school did today was like start these, I forget the name that we called them. Jose, please help me if you remember, but it was just these groups with our grade team and one of our school therapists. And it was just like a safe space where we could talk about how we were feeling about current events and just discuss what the framework would be that all information in that group stays within that group. And it just felt like a good space, and I'm comfortable with my grade team to just express my feelings because I've worked with them before, and I know it's different because there's new teachers in grade teams, but just to have that open space to talk freely and not be penalized, where those people who are facilitating the conversations will not share that information with anyone else unless like it's a dire need. And that felt really good, aside from all of the craziness going on that we try to ignore, which is also not healthy to do. And also, like what you said, minimizing teachers' feelings or just ideas, because we have ideas. We can help make this crazy world run a little bit easier the best that we can if we're heard and listened to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge.
Just like students, just like we ask of our kids, we have to do that with each other.
I feel like we could have these webinars and it could just be all of us talking and not have presentations, but I do have to wrap this up right now. Thank you all so much, and so fun to see familiar faces and know that what you're doing is such important work. So thank you. Have a good rest of your week, everyone. Take care of yourselves.
Take care, folks. It's almost Friday.
Yay. Friday Eve, yep. Bye, everybody.
Margie, hang on just a second.
Oh, my eye waters.
How
This
much
will
So I have to say this before